Assalamualaikum, good morning. For this Bioethics and Communication course, my topic for presentation is Principles of GCP Application in Research and Clinical Practice. My name is Associate Professor Dr. Wan Muhammad Izani from Department of Medicine. I'm also the head of Clinical Trial Unit, School of Medical Sciences, PPSP, USM. So what we'll discuss today is the application of GCP in research as well as in clinical practice. So when we talk about the good clinical practice, there are standards of practice that we have to adhere to. The standards of clinical trials, which include designing of clinical trials, conducting, performing, monitoring, auditing, recording, analyzing, and reporting. So all these components are inclusive of good clinical practice in clinical trials. So in clinical practice, the same concept is good clinical practice guideline. So, for example, in acute myocardial infarction, CPG, the same concept. In GCP, there's also clinical practice guideline. For clinical trials, there are good clinical practice. So there are principles of GCP. The first principle of GCP is to conduct trials according to best practice. Secondly, another principle, the main point of principles of GCP is weighing the risk versus benefits. When we conduct trials, we must make sure that there's always consideration of risk versus benefit. What benefit our patient, our subjects, versus what risk these subjects may expose to. The third principles of GCP is protection of subjects. It's the same concept, weighing benefit versus risk. What is the benefit for the subject? What is the risk? So we want to protect the safety of the subjects. Number 4, we must have adequate information to justify trial. So we have enough information that is important, relevant, which is why we are conducting this trial. And we must write a scientifically sound study protocol. The protocol must be written very scientifically sound, well written to conduct the trial. And before we conduct trial, another principle of GCP, we must receive ethical approval. So seek ethical approval before any protocol, any study being conducted. Number 7, we must be a qualified physician or a researcher in order to, before we conduct the trial. So the main principle of GCP all the time is safety of subject is a first priority. So another principle in GCP is to use qualified support staff. Investigators will need a support staff to conduct the trial. So those support staff must be qualified. Number 9 is to obtain informed consent. So any trials, before the subject recruited in the trial, the subject must sign informed consent. Informed consent must be signed before any procedures done for the patient, for the trial. And trials, all trial steps, any documentation must be appropriate, so must document. And we must protect patient confidentiality. All the information must be kept confidential. Number 12, the investigational products or IP, what we call, a study medication or study equipments must be handled appropriately. And overall, the quality system must be implemented, good quality system. So all these 13 principles of GCP must be adhered. So we talk about study organization in clinical trials. In the center, you have an investigator. Investigator can be a consultant or medical officer, someone who's been trained, who had all the qualification. An investigator should be backed up by a team. So investigator is not working alone. Investigator must have a team, co-investigators, research officers, study coordinators. What else? Study organization should also have pharmacists, a pharmacy to dispense the drug, the study medication, and also the lab technician to conduct the investigation aspects of the trial. And investigator will need to communicate with the sponsor all the time, two-way communication, that the sponsor is responsible, or investigator responsible to respond to the sponsor responsible to give information, relevant information to the investigator with regards to the conduct of the trial. And there's also an entity is called Independent Review Board. Independent Review Board is, as by the name, is independent. That means this board or panels will be overseeing the trials and give feedback to the investigator, to the team, whether there is any concern or any safety aspects which needs investigator to take action. Independent Review Board will also provide a report within the period of study, whether the study should go on or the study to be terminated. So this is very important. Review board is called Independent Review Board. And of course, investigator will be communicating, will be managing the patient, which is the subjects. And investigator will also need to communicate with the study monitors. So these are the study organization in clinical trials. And the center is the investigator. So I say we relate to this organization in clinical trials. It's the same concept when we apply this organization in ward, in medical wards or in surgical ward, when you have a consultant in the middle, which acts with the help of his medical officers, his registrars, and you have the hospital directors, you have the pharmacists, and you have the lab technician to help with the management of the patient. So the same concept, that's why we can relate clinical trials and day-to-day practice in clinical work. So highlighting the importance of investigators. So let's discuss what is an investigator, what is the role of an investigator. So who is an investigator? An investigator is a person responsible for the conduct of the clinical trial at the trial site. I mean, if a trial being conducted in USM, the person responsible will be the maybe a consultant or specialist in that field who conduct that trial in that site. And the main person, or the person who is responsible, which leads the trial, is called principal investigator. So principal investigator will be held by the co-investigators. So these principal investigators, all the investigators must be qualified and capable of conducting the trial. That is very important. And if we relate this to the role of medical officers, the role of physician or clinicians and consultant in day-to-day clinical practice, is the same thing. The consultant or the medical officer or the clinician must be capable, must be qualified to run the clinical service. So investigators must be qualified, so there are qualifications needed. So they must go through the proper education to conduct the trials. They must be trained, and they must have experience in conducting trials, especially to become the principal investigators. Usually principal investigators will start the clinical trials as co-investigators first, and then from there they will get experience being co-investigators, and then they will become, with the opportunity given, they will get the chance to become principal investigators once they have a proper training and education. So once they have achieved the training, successful completion of GCB training example, then they will be GCP certified. So with this certification, they will be able to conduct the trials. So it's the same concept in day-to-day clinical practice. For a consultant to be able to perform certain procedures, they have to be certified based on the training, based on the education that they have gone through. Responsibilities of investigator, they should have appropriate education and training and experience. They must be familiar with the investigational product. If it's something new, investigation product is new, then they have to be trained on how to handle the product. So they must be familiar with the investigation product. They must have GCP certificates. I mean, they have gone through the GCP training, as what we are doing now, highlighting the GCP element of clinical practice and clinical trials. And what is any requirement by the local authority or applicable regulatory requirements. So they must have all these requirements. They must gone through the trainings. They must have permit monitoring, audits, and inspection. So they need to, the investigator must allow any form of monitoring, auditing, or inspections by regulatory bodies, by ethical committees, or by the sponsor. And investigator also responsible to delegate duties. All these delegation of duties have to be documented. So this is an example of delegation of responsibility, log signature list. I mean, you have a name of your site staff. Example, if the site staff is a study coordinator, then the site staff will need to sign, initial, and then the principal investigator will assign a delegation logs. Example, to obtain consent or to dispense medication, to conduct physical examination. Then the investigator will write down what delegation of duties that this person has to do, and then clearly write down the time or the date that this action to be executed, or the log to be effective from the date until at the end of the date, at the end of the study example, and the PI has to initial the delegation log. At the end of the trials, the principal investigator will need to sign this log and then date it. So investigator also must have adequate resources, enough resources in terms of subjects in your hospital, in your center, whether you have enough subjects which fulfill the inclusion or exclusion criteria for the study. So investigator must have some form of judgment that the potential subjects is enough for study recruitment, and the investigator must have sufficient time to conduct the trial. So if the investigator is too busy, do not have time, then the resources is not adequate. Investigators also need to have a qualified staff such as study investigator, clinical trial, a research assistant example, or lab staff. So all these staff should be available to conduct the trials. And the last one will be the facilities, the lab, the staff, the site should have or must have enough facilities to conduct the trial. Example, the lab site, the rooms or the consultation rooms, example, to manage patient. So resources include logistics, include personnel, manpower. Investigators are also responsible to make sure that the patient under their care or the subjects under their care receive the best of medical care, responsible for trial-related medical decisions, and investigator must monitor the subject safety and report any adverse events. Anything happen to the subject, the investigator responsible to monitor and to report. Right? And another responsibility of investigator is compliance with the protocol. Investigator must read, discuss, and approve the study protocol and be familiar with all aspects of study and study medication. Investigator must comply with the protocol, not just compliance, and then any protocol deviation must be documented and explain the result for any protocol deviation. Very important element of GCP is informed consent. Informed consent, by definition, is a process by which a subject voluntarily, so I just need to highlight the voluntarily word, which is very important. The subject confirm his or her willingness to involve in the study, to participate in the study. And this process has to be documented and written, signed, and dated by the subject. And all the information in terms of benefits and risks must be explained and documented. What contents, what important information has to be explained to the subject, include the study protocol details, which explain the study procedures, days or visits, how many times the patient has to come in for the visits. The informed consent also include investigational products in details, how it works, what are the benefits and what are the risks of these investigational products, and whether there are alternatives to investigation product. If the patient were or the subject were to refuse informed consent, then whether they have options or other option alternative. So if the patient or the subjects is not able to give a consent for these reasons, either the subjects are not able to read, illiterate subjects, or if the subject have language barriers, or the subject is under vulnerable population, under age example. So then there's a need for impartial witness. An impartial witness is a legally acceptable representative, should sign the consent form and then be there to represent the subjects. So the process of informed consent, once investigator explain the whole thing and the whole procedures or information about the study protocol, the trial itself, the time should be given, ample time should be given for the subject to make decision. And the investigator must encourage the subjects to ask questions. Any questions, and answer the questions until the subject satisfied with the answers. And investigators should never influence a subject to be involved in the clinical trials. Let's talk about another aspect of GCP, which is very important topic, which is adverse events. Let's define adverse events. Adverse event, by definition, is any, highlight again, any untoward medical occurrence associated with the use of a drug or device, which is investigation product, in human, whether or not considered drug related or not, or device related. So anything happens to the subjects with who's been using the drugs or the device in the trials, whether or not it is related to that study or drug trial. Yeah. So why do we collect adverse event? Because we need to determine the safety profile of a drug or a device, because a drug is still under trial. So we want to make sure that the drug is safe, not just effective. So any safety aspect has to be collected, has to be documented, and then determine whether it's related to the drugs or not. So this is to evaluate the risk and benefits of a product. If the new product has got some benefit but more risk, then the risks outweigh the benefit. Then this data is important to provide information on the package insert. So you look at the package insert of all the new products. If approved in the marketing, they will mention all the adverse related to the study medication or the product itself. So examples of adverse events are worsening of pre-existing condition. Example, the patient have hypertension. So the patient signed the consent form, and then a few days after the patient signed consent form, started on treatment, blood pressure increased. So that means worsening of pre-existing condition, that is considered AE. Or the patient developed new illness or new signs or new physical signs or symptoms, or the patient have abnormal tests or procedure results after the patient signed consent form. So what is not AE? What is not AE? Any procedure or surgery planned before the patient involved in the trial. So example, before patient signed consent form, the patient already planned for admission for angiogram example. So that admission is not considered AE. Or patient have pre-existing condition. Example, patient already have hypertension before the patient enrolled in the study, but the blood pressure remains unchanged, remains stable, then that condition is not considered AE. Apart from AE, there's another term that we call serious adverse event, SAE. So SAE, adverse event, defined as serious when it fulfill one of these 5 criteria: death, life-threatening adverse event, inpatient hospitalization or prolongation of existing hospitalization, persistent or significant incapacity, which disrupt or the patient not able to conduct a normal life functions, or events of congenital anomaly, birth defects. So any of this, if it happens, then it's considered serious adverse events. So the rule number 1, when you have an event, you must document it. So if it's not documented, it did not happen. So now in this event, so what to document? So we need to document the event itself. The description of the event or diagnosis. And then we need to document the grading, severity, intensity, relationship, whether it's related to study drugs or not, causality, whether the event is expected or not expected, is it a serious event, what action taken for that AE, how long was the AE onset-wise and duration, and the resolution of the AE, and what was the outcome. So how to document? You need to write clearly the AE, the diagnosis, You need to sign and date. So all this documentation must be legible. If you need to do correction, you need to cross with one straight line. You not use liquid paper, sign and date, and then write the reason for change. So just write with a clear one straight line, make amendment, sign and date. Grading wise, severity can be mild, moderate, or severe, or life-threatening, or death. So investigator will decide whether this is based on discretion or clinical judgment. Either the AE is severe or moderate or life-threatening. Severe may not be serious. Severity refers to the intensity of an event. Seriousness is a guide for defining regulatory reporting obligations. So based on the patient's outcome or action. So let's look at the relationship causality. If there is a reasonable possible that the event was related to or caused by the IP, whether it is related or not related, or unlikely, possible, probable, definitely related. So these are the terms that we use. Some studies do not use the same term, but this is an example of study relationship, intervention relationship. So the investigator will have to decide whether the event is related or not related, likely or unlikely, probable or possible. Unexpected versus expected. Expected, if the AE is expected, it is mentioned in the brochure, then it is expected. If AE it's not listed in the investigator brochure, then AE is considered unexpected. So what action taken for the AE? For the study drugs, maybe no action taken for the study drug itself. That means subject will continue with the study medication, or the dose may be modified if the investigator decide that the AE is due to the study medication. Then the treatment or the action can be reducing the dose. Or sometimes action or treatment require medical intervention, hospitalization example. Or sometimes action taken to stop the medication or to stop the investigation product or study medication. So all treatment given for the AE has to be documented in the CRF, and then this event will need to be followed up because we need to close the AE in terms of outcome events. So duration, the start date or the onset of the AE, and then the time when the AE resolve. So outcome, resolve, ongoing, or resolve with sequelae. So this is an example of adverse event form. You would have the site name, patient's ID, and then the diagnosis or AE itself, and then the grading of severity, relationship to the IP, action, outcome of AE example, death, worsening of condition example, expected or not expected, and whether it fulfills serious adverse event definition, and then all the treatment taken for this AE. So in short, reporting AEs is all about safety of subjects. The responsibility is on the principal investigator to make sure that subject is safe. Principal investigator responsible to inform the sponsor that AE, all the AE informed the sponsor, and then documented and then report to the ethics IRB, independent review board, And in the event of audit, by example, by external authority, monitoring board, example FDA, comes to the site, they will need to audit the site, will be in communication with the principal investigators. They will analyze the data, all the AEs and other documentations. So all the records and reports must be complete, must be legible, all the data must be legible, the source document are consistent, date, initials, and explain changes in documents. And then I said, when you need to make correction, make it a simple line cross, date, sign, and explain the changes. So nearly finished, a few more slides. An independent review board, institutional review board is an independent body. I mentioned this in the early slides, the importance of independent review board. A committee which include medical professionals or non-medical members. There are public members as well. Their role mainly to provide public assurance of the protection of the subjects. So their role is to review, approve, and providing opinion on the trial protocol, evaluate the suitability of the investigators. They look at the investigator profile, whether the investigator is competent, well-trained, with experience or not. And then they look at the facilities, whether the facilities is suitable for the conduct of the trials. And then they review methods and materials to be used in the study, and they review the process of informed consent. Investigator must communicate with the IRB. All the information must be reported, must have approval from the IRB. If there is an update on the protocol, new information in the IP or any protocol deviations, this has to be updated to the IRB. So Data Safety Monitoring Board Committee is an independent committee of clinicians, statisticians. There may be other specialties who assess the progress of the trial to look at the safety aspects, efficacy aspect, as well as anything which deemed important for the study itself at specific intervals. The committee can make a recommendation that the study can be continued, should be continued, or modified, or stopped based on the data that they looked at. So, Data Safety Monitoring Board Committee, or IRB, is to ensure the studies do not expose subjects to any undue harm. So this is to ensure the risk and benefit ratio falls within an acceptable range. That means if you can do no good, at least do no harm. So take home pearls in this very short summary of GCP. Safety is the first principle of GCP. In clinical practice, do no harm. That's the most important. We need to comply to the study protocol. And when we manage our patient as a clinicians, we treat patient based on the standard guidelines. We must have informed consent, and any adverse events that has to be evaluated and reported in timely manner. Communicate with all the stakeholders, anything new, any protocol deviations. And lastly, no documentation not done. Thank you.